I teach that to my boys now. Like, we talk to them about the dangers of pornography, and we talk to them about, the things that boys will have to deal with and why integrity on your cell phone is important. But for a season, they were starting to make really crass jokes, like jokes that were inappropriate, or they'd laugh about inappropriate things or make loaded statements or whatever. And finally, I sat them down and I was like, listen, enough. Like, we're not going to do this. This is not who you are. This is not our family culture. And here's why. And so I laid it out for them. I was like, listen, when I was single, I never would have dated a guy who made dirty jokes ever, because that tells me there's no sexual integrity and he has a perverted heart. And so I just like laid these things out for the boys. And I said, guys, listen. And my son had just gotten back from a missions trip where they went to the red light district. And I said, do you see how those women are being abused? And he said, yeah. And I said, there are enough men in this world that are not safe. I said, we need men in this world who are going to be safe and protect women and provide for women in a way that God designed you to do. And so it was almost like you can feel their manhood start to like up a little bit on the inside.
Hi, you're listening to Java with Jen with your host, Jenna Lee Samuel. On this show, I bring the simplicity of hearing God's voice into everyday life in a no-nonsense, authentic, and super practical way. With coffee in hand and real life in our faces, let's do this.
Hey, you guys. Thanks so much for joining me here for another episode at Java with Jen. I have, once again, the lovely Taryn Marchena, who was on the show with us last week, and we were talking about how to know if you are disconnected from yourself and how to get present again, and the way that that affects your relationships, your relationship with the Lord. And, we talked about a lot of different things that were really beautiful. We just talked about it, so I'm not remembering them, but it's because I'm focused on what we're talking about today, which is overcoming broken trust with men, yourself, and others. Now, we're kind of going to hone in on this whole broken trust with men. Now, any of you guys who are tuning in, you probably already know what we're talking about because you saw the title of the episode and you clicked it, so you're brave. But we are not going to be demonizing men. We honor men. We love men. We need men in our lives. So I just want to lead with that. But a lot of women, and maybe some men, have dealt with injuries, hurts, broken trust, specifically with the male persons, and it impacts them. And the brain remembers, and the brain sometimes will put up patterns to make sure that doesn't happen again, but we want to get past our broken patterns. And so thank you for being here. That was a really long intro, but I'm excited to dive into this with you.
Me too. I know it's a big topic, so thanks for giving it the moment it needed.
Okay, so Taryn specializes in this area. She's a community activator, teacher, and elder at her church, and a business owner. She reconnects you to trust after trauma, which is the number one thing that's broken after we've gone through trauma, so that you can live from who you want to be, who you truly are. Last year, she worked with over 115 clients one-on-one as they broke away from the lies of their past and rediscovered safety. Kayaking on a Colorado lake at sunset and narrating her opinions as she watches Survivor with her daughter and husband are two of her favorite pastimes. She loves Jesus, spicy Cheez-Its, and vanilla lattes in that order. I'm with you on the vanilla lattes. Well, and Jesus, of course. So you're in the right place, girl.
2 out of 3. Perfect.
Jesus and coffee. What more do we need? Okay, so let's dive into this topic. So when I was interviewing Taryn to see about having her on the show, I asked her for some topic ideas. And this is one that she threw out. And I was like, no one has ever talked about this on the show, but it was so specific. I was like, clearly, you have some expertise in this area. And so why don't you kind of take us into why is this something we even need to talk about, of helping women specifically overcome broken trust with men, but also that bleeds into themselves and others. So how did this end up on your radar? Why are we talking about this?
Yeah. Yes. And I will echo what you said. We are not demonizing any men today. And so if it's more comfortable for you to pop that out with we're just talking about a trigger, really a very specific type of trigger, then hear it from that angle. But I have struggled with trust after past memories resurfaced about 5 years ago now. And it got on my radar when I remember my daughter was invited to a birthday party sleepover at a friend's house. We knew them fairly well. But fear just boiled over inside of me to the point where my body was vibrating and I was shaking. And my immediate response internally was to say, absolutely not.
Right.
No way. And I knew what the fear was. I was terrified that one of the parents would hurt or touch my child inappropriately.
Yeah.
Even opening this conversation opened the can of worms from my past, and it just touched on the exact fear button that I would have loved to avoid. So I remember I had this gigantic beanbag in my house, and I just slumped into it in the corner of my living room, and I grabbed all the blankets to cover me with some sense of comfort in my utter discomfort.
Yeah.
And I just prayed, like, Lord, I don't want to place all my fears on my daughter, and I don't want to steal any joy that you may have for her just because I can't handle this.
Yeah.
But I do want discernment. So will you help me to know the difference between wisdom and fear?
Yeah.
Because it wasn't just sleepovers. It was, if she asked to go play across the field, across the street with friends, dread would fill me.
Mm.
And I was so sure something terrible would happen. It was more than just the fears that every single parent has. It's
Crippling.
this particularly. Yeah, it had roots to past trauma. It was a trigger of deep distrust of
Mm.
others, but namely men, and it
Mhm.
turned into paranoia. So
Wow.
this same idea of just letting my child out of my control, it's still something that I struggle with. I will not lie about that, but I will let her go do the thing when I think that fear is in the driver's seat. And I'll
Mm.
just check in and ask questions afterward, which I believe is wisdom. But with every ask, it does really draw me into the Lord to say, I have to trust that you are the protector and that
Yeah.
you will protect my mind in this.
Yeah. Wow, that's so good. And I feel like to be fair, while that's really good self-awareness that you recognize that your reaction was beyond, it was beyond maybe a normal type of "Oop, not that," you know what I mean? Because there is kind of a movement happening right now of people not doing sleepovers because so
Mm.
many people are realizing there's a lot of, in fact, I heard a story the other day about this parent who they would not let their daughter go to a sleepover till she was 18. Like, didn't happen. And they put up with a lot from their daughter of her just wanting to and feeling like she was missing out and all this stuff. When she was 18, she finally got to go on her first sleepover. All these girls are sitting around. The daughter shared, I think she led with that this was her first. She'd never been allowed. And they're like, why? She's like, my dad and mom feel like they got to protect me. And then the girls started opening up about their experiences. And I don't know how many of them, but apparently it was enough of them that the daughter came home and just hugged her parents. And she was like, thank you for that. I realized last night that you were protecting me. And so for those who are listening, or even for you, like, there is some validity to the concern.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
I think the wisdom that you did demonstrate, firstly, was your self-awareness of recognizing, okay, this is an extreme level of fear. This is about me processing my experiences more than it is about her sleepover. And because I went to sleepovers growing up and I never had an issue. There can be safe ones, of course. And so let's talk about this though, because statistically, I think it's like it was 1 in 4, then it became 1 in 3, and now I want to say it's 1 in 2 women have been sexually assaulted, molested, or raped at some point in their life. And for
Mhm.
boys, it's not much different. It's like 1 in 3 or 1 in 4. And so this is an actual real thing that a lot of women probably have to work through. And I imagine probably affects their marriages. I imagine just affects, I mean, we all have to, it's not fair to demonize a whole gender because of an experience that we had. Just like, it's not fair for a man to think that all women are just after their money, right? And so how do women go about this? I think what you prayed, which is, God, give me the discernment to recognize what is wisdom and what is fear. I think that's the most fundamental and essential prayer in the process of healing from our triggers, because the reason why that trigger's there in the first place is because there was a violation. So there is a threat somewhere to some measure. Why don't you talk a little bit about why this is important to discuss?
Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely what you said, that the stats are incredibly high, and that's just what goes reported. Not to mention that faith oftentimes is tangled up in this conversation a little bit to hide the abuse of any gender, really. And so a lot of this healing work that we do is helping people recognize that something wasn't actually normal that happened and it was abusive, and healing from the impact that lingers. But this is not a fear that people typically say, oh, I am afraid of men. Never
Yeah.
have I ever had a client say, I think that this is a thing I have. But as we work together and we begin to ask questions, especially if it's around healing or relationships, like you said, what surfaces is this fear that men aren't who they appear to be. And that overall, they feel really vulnerable in the presence of men. And we are talking about physical, sexual, emotional, intellectual safety. But sometimes it can even just be a subset of men, like a very particular feature that somebody has that feels more threatening than others. Sure, it can be generalized, but oftentimes it has ties to some person somewhere along the way that the features will remind you of that person. I like to think about it this way, that your brain is constantly trying to keep you loaded. That's its whole job. And it's taking shortcuts that it thinks is going to be best for you. It's on your side. So say that you get rear-ended in your car at a stoplight. The next few months, if not years, every time you come to a stoplight, you are going to be checking your rear view mirror.
Yeah.
You may even brace for impact. You may come to a stop slower, so it kind of gives the car behind you advanced warning. These are all shortcuts that your brain is doing to kind of say, avoid that scary thing that happens. And it is the same idea with men. Your brain may just be telling you, give them what they want, or they might hurt you. Speak up for yourself from the start so you don't end up in another abusive relationship again. Or men just want to use you, so stay away from them completely. Men are trash is a common phrase I hear, and that is, it just is. And it points to fear. It doesn't point to a belief about all men, but they're telling themselves, don't trust what they say because it might not be true, or you have to be hyper vigilant of your surroundings to stay safe. Or the biggest one is probably analyze their behavior and deem any yellow flag that you see as red. So you can hear that it's not, I'm afraid of men. It's more subtle than that, but it's all these behaviors that work from that core fear that something happens with an authority figure that shouldn't. So we just circle back to, it creates a paranoia that I can't trust my own judgment of men. For me, because I constantly second guess myself, my autopilot was conducting an assessment, always asking questions. Is this person who they appear to be? What do they want from me? And very quickly ruling people out just so I could stay shielded.
See, and I'm thinking of someone that I know that she's in her 40s and she's dating. She wants to get married. She's never been married before. But of the men she's dated, she has experienced a lot of really bad, she just hasn't made good choices. And they weren't blatantly bad choices. They ended up revealing that they were bad choices, like pretty bad choices. And so she's kind of navigating, and she'll constantly run messages by me where she'll be like, okay, I need to address this issue. How does this sound? And I'm like, that sounds a little self-sabotaging, or I'll be like, it sounds like you're looking for a problem, back up, bring a little empathy to the conversation, and it's so hard when you're in that place to begin to recognize, is my brain sabotaging me and just functioning in fear, or is this healthy? And I think that's the biggest challenge when you have gone through that stuff, is how do I land back in the place of healthy? How do I not just live in this place of self-sabotage due to a need to survive, right? How do you help people identify that?
Yeah. Well, that is actually the core thing that I see. It is this distrust for self, which makes decisions feel impossible, like that, especially with relationships. And probably the most consistent question that I get is the same one that you heard me ask myself in the beginning. How can I build that discernment to know that the difference between wisdom and fear? Or another way to put that is, how do I know when I'm actually making a good logical decision, or is this just emotional because of my past? How do I know if if what I am seeing is even real, especially with gaslighting, and can I trust it? Or am I being bamboozled again?
Yeah.
Really, what we're just talking about is discernment. And if there is anything that the enemy wants us to feel, it's confused.
That's
It
true.
is undermining the Spirit's authority in us, making us question our God-given gut. And now if I don't trust that I can even hear from God correctly, and you don't trust your own judgment, you certainly don't trust others. His lies, they penetrate effortlessly. And because there's no testing in the Spirit, there's no buffer. Ask if it's true. Everything gets through with your permission. When we are in this headspace, it's actually self-focused because we're scared and we're in survival mode. So building back discernment for yourself and to trust the Lord, not yourself, for that steady ground is that crucial piece to healing, which is why I focus there, so we can kind of close the floodgates of confusion. But just to end with this one, remember that our brain's job is to keep us safe. It's doing what it's supposed to.
Yeah.
But God's heart for us isn't actually safety. It's to lead us into relationship with him. And my definition of a good God means that he's going to keep me safe. So to instead ask God, what is your definition of good? And to turn to scripture for what his answer was. And that was incredibly healing for me.
Wow, that's so good. I agree. I think fundamentally we're looking for safety, but I feel like too what I see as far as why the Lord wants to lead us into healing is because if we're living fundamentally just looking for safety, we will always be operating from a place of fear, not a place of rest or peace or abundance. And God came to rescue us from that. You know, that's the whole reason he came, is so that we don't have to live in this survival headspace, but we can live in a place of peace and thriving. And so totally, I've been on that journey of feeling like, I don't think I heard the Lord right. Like this screwed up my life. You know, I thought he was telling me to go left and I went left and holy crap, it's been traumatizing, you know? And so then processing that, I feel like that's a whole nother layer beyond do I trust men or do I trust people, is do I trust the Lord? Because I thought I was following him, you know? And so how do you help people process that? Because you said really the biggest part of the journey is rediscovering that sense of discernment. But I feel like that discernment is impossible to rebuild if underneath it is the doubt that I can trust the Lord or the doubt that I could hear him correctly. So what's the bridge from point A to point B on that one?
Yeah. I mean, I will tell my own story here that I had to go backwards in time for myself with this to kind of discover the moment where I realized that my view of God began to jumble. And I remember the day that I sat across from a friend, a very loud local breakfast spot, holding my coffee, and I just leaned in and said, Jesus and the Holy Spirit are safe, but God is not. And he chose not to protect me when I needed him. And different parts of the Trinity, they bring up different comfort levels within me. And my fear of men had extended to God. And the only reason that this longtime fear it fit very nice and neat on my view of God is because somewhere deep down I believed that God was unreliable and that he was unjust and that he yielded his power over and that he changed on a dime. And I overlaid my experience with humans onto God, and this distortion just took root. But for this specific circumstance where I felt like God was not good to me, I worked to heal that layer for a long time. And what I didn't know is that this warping or twistedness, that I know I'm not the only one that experiences this, but it was going to pop up again and again every time I found myself in shame or in questioning. It was this belief that God could turn a blind eye and that he was not there in moments that were incredibly painful. And yet Jesus, he seemed to be loving and steadfast, and that just sent a crack right down the foundation of faith. And that's what I see a lot with my clients too, is Jesus is safe, God is not. So instead of living from this place of fully secure, that I know what my faith offers, I lived kind of from this guidebook that made God a little bit more trustworthy to me. And I created order out of what seemed like a God that was out of whack in his priorities. So I created my own God.
Yeah.
Just kind of based on my perception of his presence and painful experiences. And that's what we all do. Whispers from the enemy, they spin a convincing lie that God is not the same yesterday, today, and forever. He was changing and raging and caging. And what I run into a lot with people and what I ran into myself is, you might think, how does a Christian even get to that point? Like, isn't believing in God kind of just the core tenet of your faith? No way do people think that way in church, but I didn't think that way at all. It was in my unawareness. I felt this way, but kind of these thoughts like, God is good, he's ever present, refuge in my times of trouble. I did believe that intellectually, but not unwaveringly to my core. And I had not taken this tension between knowledge and experiences and brought them to God. So it creates a lot of confusion. But a question that can be really helpful for people, if you were just resonating with my story, when you pray, who do you pray to? Is there one in the Trinity that you talk to more? Is there one that you talk to less? And just to start there with, who do I feel more comfortable with? And to take that honest look at how your past may be informing your view of God now is essential to that closeness and that authenticity.
Wow. So how did you begin to reconcile your view of God then? Because obviously you went on a journey and obviously you were like, I need to reconcile this. How did God show up, or how did you take that journey?
Yeah, I wrestled with scripture. So what brought a lot of this up for me was the story of Hagar in Genesis, and being utterly cracked open, feeling like this guy, Abraham, that I grew up learning so many good things about, I feel like he really did Hagar wrong. And he got her pregnant against her will, and then he abandoned her and her child. And yet Hagar went back to abuse because she trusted God. Whatever the angel said at the well to her, she was like, okay, I'll go back. And I couldn't, that was a big wrestling for me. And so to sit with that scripture and to say, God, there's something in this. There is something that the angel told her that points to you loving women, and that points to you deeply caring for her, to the point that you would invite her back into that. And there is one line in that verse where it says, even makes me emotional thinking about it, but he says, your son will be a wild donkey of a man. And I remember the first 15 times I read that, I was like, that's weird.
It's like, we all got to say that about our kids, right?
Yeah, I'm like, that's every mom's worst nightmare, but okay. That led her to hope. So what's going on here? Yeah. And like looking at some of the contextual and the historical background, what that would have meant in her day is that your son will be like a wild Mustang. And that pointed to freedom. That pointed to, I have freedom for you ahead. And I sent me into this place with God that was like, of course you do. I just needed to know that like the God of the Old Testament is the same as Jesus. I needed some type of reconciliation here. And of course he's going to deliver, because he is the same, and he does care for women, and he does care for me individually in my story that I had found so many parallels to with Hagar. Yeah. So it was really that moment with the Lord to recognize that he wants freedom for me more than I do.
Wow. That's so good. You know, when I was processing, I love how you said wrestling with scripture. In fact, I was talking with a friend the other day. She's a pastor, and she was sharing how she's kind of in that space, the dark night of the soul, where she's wrestling through scripture. She's wrestling through how God relates to her and how she relates to God. And she loves the Lord. There's no question, but she's also been through some traumatic relationships. And she recently just had an encounter with some of those relationships that just broke her. And I think there's no separating our human experience from the spillover onto our relationship with the Lord. There's just no way to keep them neatly compartmentalized. They all blur together. And the beautiful thing about that is that the word says that God knows we are but dust. And the word says our walls are ever before him. Like he loves us, and those things that get in the way in our relationship with him, he's attentive to, you know, and he's not threatened by our human experience. He's very secure. He doesn't think, oh no, she thinks I'm not good. Am I not good? Like, God doesn't go in that tailspin. You know, he knows he's good. And so he is stable and he's steady when we're trying to sort the things out. And I believe those wrestlings are precious to him. You know, I really believe they are. And one thing that someone had said to me that helped me in my wrestling, because my wrestling was, God, I thought you led me into this relationship that has been so toxic and destructive to me. How are you actually good? I trusted you blindly. How are you good? And when they said, it was on a podcast, and they said, you know, God isn't good because he rescues us from all harm. He's good because he walks with us through it. And I heard someone else recently say that we oftentimes think of God as this objective outside onlooker to our human experience. And it can be easy for us to think through that lens that God is not intervening, that God is not involved, that God is removed from our situation unjustly, you know? Yeah. But she said, instead, we have to view it as God is with us, experiencing the trauma just as we are, because he lives in us. He has a very inside view. He's looking at it through our eyes. That's the little eyes he's looking through, and so he's in the trauma. Otherwise, the word wouldn't say, the way you treated the hungry and the thirsty, that's how you treated me. God experiences life's brokenness with us. And to be able to look at it through that lens brings him nearer in the suffering and helps us realize the suffering isn't greater than him, but it is just a part of the human broken experience. There's just no way to totally avoid it. And so because we can't, we might as well cling to the only one who can walk with us through all of it. And so thank you for sharing your story, by the way. That was so powerful.
Yeah. Well, can
Go
I
ahead.
share something quickly here?
Yeah.
Now I'm feeding off of you. But yes, for you to put words to that, I mean, I had a very similar experience, but I've never heard someone describe it quite in that way. I was assaulted on my high school campus, and is a place that I have I still live in the same town. I have avoided it my entire life, just going in that direction. And one day I was driving by, someone told me they were late for coffee. And so I pulled over into that parking lot, and it was in my wrestling with the story of Hagar. And I just said, Lord, if you say that you were with me in this, then I want to feel where you were. I want to walk back through that night with you to say, how did you walk with me? Because you said you were right by me. And so I walked back to the space that everything happened, and I just wept over it. It was a mourning, but it was also a hopeful cry. I see it now. I have spent my whole life so angry and so like you abandoned me. But I see it now. I see that you were there weeping with me, that you did not leave my side. But I couldn't see that until I knew your true character. And now that I know your true character, I can see how you really did care for me.
Wow.
So yeah, it is a mindset shift that opens us to see how God really is in our story.
Yeah. And I love that you shared that, because I'm finding more and more for people that believe and know the Lord, that it is such an essential part of the healing process to be able to go back to that memory and say, God, where were you in that moment? Where were you? Like, show me where you were, because suddenly the Lord is able to rewrite that memory. And the power of rewriting a memory is you walk away with something different than you walked in. And it's when we go through something traumatizing, the thing that makes it traumatic is what we walk away with, the beliefs we walked away with, the lies and the narratives that we pick up. And people don't realize, I think people don't understand, like, your brain moves at a rate of like 2 million bits of data a second. And so it's constantly picking up clues from your environment and taking on beliefs subconsciously. Like 95% of what happens in your brain is on a subconscious level. So it's not even conscientious thinking. And so when we walk through something, we walk away with a whole lot that we weren't even choosing to walk away with. It just happened all there in the computer of your brain. And so which is, I think, also why it allows us to hold space, passionate space for ourselves, because your brain is just doing what it was designed to do, just to keep you alive and to function, right? And so that's why the Lord's role, the Holy Spirit's role of leading us into truth, is so essential. Not just the truth of the word, the truth of where were you in that moment, the truth of here's what actually happened, the truth of you can think about this differently. It's his job to walk with us through that, because he's aware of everything that's happening on that subconscious level that we're not even aware of. And so his role in our healing process is so, so, so essential. I love that you shared that story. Thank you for doing that. So what role then in this journey of, like, kind of going back to the fear of men thing and overcoming that specifically, how did that impact your marriage? Like, how did that impact? And the only reason I'm asking, and if that's too personal, you don't have to answer it. The reason I bring it up is because I feel like if we don't speak to that, there's a lot of women that are dealing with it. And they're like, what do I do with this? Because I haven't heard a lot of people speak to that,
100%. I'd say I was sure that it was going to ruin it very quickly. I mean, even getting up into the dating part, the extreme fear, I thought, oh, I have just been content, Lord. I just haven't wanted to date. No, I didn't date for 8 years because I was petrified.
No.
So to let somebody in was in itself that discernment of like, oh my gosh, Lord, what if I don't recognize a red flag? What if I miss it and I set myself up for forever with this terrible person? The fear was just so loud. And I was thankful that, I mean, I would just bring that to him and be like, I'm feeling really nervous. But there's fear in that too, that what if they're like, wow, this is a lot and you're a lot and everything that's happened to you is a lot. And so there was first the fear that all of this is going to make you run, because it actually makes me want to run. But then there's all kinds of impact with that. There's sexual impact. Working through sexual triggers together that is a very delicate process.
Yeah.
And sex needs so much safety after assaults. And the willingness for someone to just pause, or the willingness to ask questions, and maybe doesn't feel like what we see in the movies, and it shouldn't. It should feel safe. But for me, what was core was making this distinction between, I can not only focus on what isn't safe, I have to also begin defining what is safe in a person, and then look for that in him, and continue to remind myself, you are not this person. You are not somebody from my past.
Yeah.
You are safe, even when my brain is telling me, no, it's you and you're scary. But it's had impact, I mean, from sex to emotions. And I would say probably the biggest one with just the fear of men piece is the speaking up, like learning that my voice is important too. And that somebody actually is going to want to hear that and to care about my voice, and not just dim it down or not believe me or whatever it is. My voice is important. And so that became like a core thing when I was dating my husband, of it's really hard for me to do that. And I just told him, it's really hard for me to speak up for myself. And sometimes I need help making space. So can you ask me twice?
Yeah.
Can you ask me twice when you're wanting my opinion? And the first time I probably won't give it to you. And the second time I will, because I know you care.
Yeah.
So just a ton of communication around everything, really. And now we're to a point where I don't think about it every day.
Yeah.
The first year we were together, I thought about all of this all day long.
Oh,
But it finds its rhythm. And the Lord is so gracious to redeem all of those details.
that's so good. I love that so much. Kind of redeeming the idea of men being safe, which you beautifully described. The context of this coming in was, what to do when you're afraid of men. But I think something that I've grown to love, especially raising 4 boys, is, and especially in different scenes, like I'm one of those people, I kind of look for God's nature in humankind in patterns, right? So
Good.
when I'm like, all women tend to do this, then I'm like, okay, that must be a reflection of God's nature, his feminine, soft, gentle nature somehow. Like the fact that all women tend to be nurturing or want to create a home, or whatever. And when I say all women, this is a generalization, and then the fact that all men are driven by this need, all good men are driven by this need to protect and to provide. There's this huge core innate need, and that is a reflection of God's nature. And so I remember one time talking with my husband, and we were communicating through some poor communication, and we were talking about, how in the moment when I felt threatened by the way he was saying something, I'd get defensive. And he was like, when you say it like that, I just feel so attacked. And I'm like, well, you're attacking me, And he was like, if you can just say, honey, you're hurting me, then instead of me wanting to fight you, I'll want to protect you. And I'm like,
oh, it's good.
Oh, that helps. And so, and so just by changing the language a little bit. And so what that showed me, though, is how fundamental that it is that his nature is to protect, and so I teach that. I teach that to my boys now. Like, we talk to them about the dangers of pornography, and we talk to them about, the things that boys will have to deal with, and why integrity on your cell phone is important, and why this and why that. But for a season, they were they were starting to make really crass jokes, like jokes that were inappropriate, or they'd laugh about inappropriate things or make loaded statements or whatever. And I was really, they were minor moments, but they were enough to bother me, you know? And finally I sat them down and I was like, listen, enough. Like, we're not going to do this. This is not who you are. This is not our family culture. And here's why. And so I laid it out for them. I was like, listen, when I was single, I never would have dated a guy who made dirty jokes ever, because that tells me there's no sexual integrity and he has a perverted heart. And so I just like laid these things out for the boys. And I said, guys, I said, listen. And my son had just gotten back from a missions trip where they went to the red light district. And I said, do you see how those women are being abused? And he said, yeah. And I said, there are enough men in this world that are not safe. I said, we need men in this world who are going to be safe and protect women and provide for women in a way that God designed you to do. And so it was almost like you can feel their manhood start to like stand up a little bit on the inside.
Absolutely. I have to piggyback off of that. Is that okay?
Oh, yeah.
Because it does speak to the men piece, that men have an incredible ability to reconnect us to safety with men and to rewrite a lot of those past stories. And I remember the night that I decided this everything that's resurfacing is really eating me up inside, and I'm going to tell my small group. I really need some support, and I've been with this community for a lot of years. And I walked in and we're sitting outside around this fire, and I saw 4 guys. I was like, Lord, you told me all day I was going to share this tonight. Is this some joke that there's no women here tonight? That's never since that day happened ever.
Wow.
And I decided I'm still going to share it tonight. I'm going to share this big thing happened, and I need support. And so it came time, we were all going around talking about how we were, and I just said, I was raped, and I'm really struggling with the impact of that. And inside I was like, now I'm done. And I have my walls up and my armor's on, and I don't like any of you guys. But every single one of them, because I was like, okay, next person. Like,
they're like, no.
And they just sat with them. And every single one of them texted me the next day individually and just said, hey, I'm thinking about you. Thank you for sharing what you did, especially with us. And I realized the only way that I would have ever said that to a group of men was because they have walked with me for long enough that I deeply trusted who they were and their hearts for me. And it was, to this day, one of the most healing nights of my life. And God orchestrated, of course, because if he hadn't prompted me all day, tonight's the night, I would have never done that. But he knew this is crucial to your safety, even though it looks like a risk right now.
Wow, that's so good. I love what I'm hearing in your story that were pivot points of your healing, was that you went back to the place of your pain, kind of like Hagar. You went back to the place of your pain so that God could rewrite the outcome, right? You revisited it. And it's kind of like our brain needs that, you know, like I feel like I've known so many people who've gone through these situations where maybe they loved leading worship and then something happened and they were deeply wounded in the being on the worship team. And then they go through this season of never picking up their instrument. And then the Lord starts prompting them to go back to the very place and do it again. And it's like everything they can do to keep from running, you know?
Yes.
But it's because God is a redeemer. He's a restorer, and he wants you to go back to where, and maybe not literally, like situations are different, but sometimes it's just mentally or in a dream, you know, or whatever it is. But the Lord wants to rewrite those memories to heal that wound. And so you going back to the high school, you sharing that with men, like those were all pivot points that were significant to your healing, because it not only gave the Lord the ability to be present with you in that place in a different way, but it allowed your brain to even rebuild the associations and build some safety in those associations, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, because we often, when something from our past kind of triggers us again, we think, why is the Lord bringing this up again? I want to be done with this. I don't want my mind to go there anymore. But you're 100% right that he's never going to bring something up to hurt us. He's always going to bring something up for our freedom and for our healing. And so when that comes up, to just ask that question. I know I've had to retrain myself to not get mad and to say, Lord, are you wanting me to look at something here? What is it? Like, what do you want me to do with this? Instead of shame, shame. Why is this coming up again? And I don't want to look at it. But yeah, we do have to believe that God is for us in order to go there.
That's so good. That's so good. Well, thank you for sharing the story. I can't believe we're already through our time, but why don't you go ahead and share how people can connect with you? Obviously, you coach with people and you work with them to rewrite their stories and get healing and get connected with the truth of who they are. And so why don't you share a little bit about that, how they can connect with you?
Yes. Well, usually where people want to start is tell me how I can learn to kind of create these feelings of safety within me or learn to be comfortable with discomfort and triggers. And I'm going to lead you back to just one of my very first principles. I have a solid self-trust process. It's to get grounded in who you are. So something from today was really connecting with you. I have a group program that's coming up. It's a 10-week program anchored into authenticity, launching September 12th, and I don't want you to miss out on it. If you want to experience becoming grounded in trust for yourself so that you can feel sure of your judgment, confident in who you want to be, register for that. I also have a free Facebook community where we talk about all of this and more related to healing and trauma. So the link for that will be in the show notes along with social media. And feel free to DM me, email me, tons of ways to get a hold.
So good. Yes, I think the date that this episode is going up is just a couple days before your program begins. So if you guys are hearing this, even if her program has already begun, connect with her because she's still always working with people. Make sure and reach out. If this did resonate, a lot of times we just need someone, an outside love, an outside hand, and outside comfort and support to walk with us, just like she did in your small group. You know, you're like, I need support in this. And that was an important part of your healing process. And so if you're listening and you're like, I do need support, like, I don't know how to navigate this on my own, nothing is wrong with you. God designed us for community. He designed that our healthiest versions of ourselves come in the context of community. And so if you need assistance, you need help, there's no shame in that. In fact, it's a moment of wisdom. So connect.
Absolutely.
So connect with Taryn, and those links are in the show notes. You guys, thanks so much for listening. And if this touched your heart, or if you have a friend that you feel like this would really resonate with, would you share it with them? In fact, throw it on social media and tag me at Java with Jen so that I know that you're listening. And feel free to let us know what you thought of this episode. We were a little bit unsure how to tread the waters of this topic, and we didn't want men to feel targeted or anything, but I feel like this was such a really beautiful conversation. And so share it, subscribe, and Taryn, thank you so much for coming on here. It was a blessing. You guys have a great week. Connect with Taryn, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for tuning in to today's show. Listen, let's stay connected. Come follow me on Instagram at Java with Jen, where you can follow the latest and say hey. It's a really great way to stay in touch. Many of you have also asked how you can support the show. You can make donations through the Anchor app or on Patreon, or of course by sharing, rating, and reviewing on social media and iTunes as well. Your heartfelt feedback always reminds me why I do this. Also, don't miss our merch store where you can get super cool Java with Jen swag and coffee. Find it at javawithjenmerch.com. Until next time, remember, hearing God's voice is simple, and He wants to be a part of your everyday life. See you next week.